In this video, we're going to be proving that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. So hopefully at this point you understand how to prove that triangles are congruent. We're going to add one more step to that kind of a proof. So once we've established that we have two congruent triangles, then all of their corresponding parts must be congruent. And so we're going to add that last line to our proof. Rather than saying corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent, which is a mouthful and a lot to write, we're going to use this acronym instead, CPCTC, which says the same thing. Let's do a proof here to practice. Remember the 5 steps that we've been using. We always start with our given statement. And our reason is always because it was given to us. Does that allow us to draw anything in our diagram? Because we are bisecting an angle, we must be cutting that into 2 equal angles. So find angle DAB, that's essentially angle A here. That got cut into 2 equal halves on either side. So let's mark those 2 smaller angles as congruent, and then let's talk about those 2 angles. So let's name the top angle BAC and the bottom angle DAC, and we'll say that they're congruent. We said that they're congruent because angle A got bisected, so that's the definition of a bisector. We've used up that given statement. We drew what we could and we wrote about all we could. So let's move on to the next given statement. Segment AB is congruent to segment AD, so let's mark that in our picture. Let's state it in our proof here. That was a given statement. So we've marked it, we've stated it. We have 2 out of 3 parts that we need to prove congruent triangles. So let's come up with a plan and let's see what possible missing parts we have. We have a side, angle, maybe the side right here is something we talk about. Let's see if we go the other way and come up with something else. What if we go angle, side, angle? We'd be talking about angles B and D. Because we don't know anything about those 2 angles, angle, side, angle is probably not going to be our method. Hopefully you recognize that side AC here is reflexive with itself. So let's go ahead and use that method, side, angle, side. Let's talk about that last side. Segment AC is congruent to itself because of the reflexive property. Now that we know that these 2 triangles are congruent because of that side angle side congruence method, let's say that. So we're going to name the top triangle and the bottom triangle. So let's call the top triangle ABC. If we call the top triangle ABC, let's make sure and name that bottom triangle by lining up corresponding parts in that first triangle. So A corresponds with A, B and D correspond, and C would correspond with itself. So make sure you name that second triangle such that its parts correspond with that first triangle's name. Those 2 triangles are congruent because of that side angle side method. Now that we've established that the 2 triangles are congruent, we know that all of their corresponding parts are the same. So we can prove that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 because of CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. All right, let's do one more. You can pause the video right here and test yourself. See how far you get. Again, that 5-step process tells us we're going to start with our given statement. So if segment PQ is bisecting angle SQR, let's find SQR, vertex of Q. So that breaks angle Q up into 2 equal angles. Let's say that those 2 angles are the same using our congruency marks. And then let's state it in our proof. So angle SQP on the left, or PQS, is congruent to angle RQP, or PQR. And the reason they were congruent is because angle Q got split into 2 equal halves. It was bisected, so that's the definition of a bisector. So that's step 2 and 3. Let's go back and repeat those steps, talking about our next given statement. We are told that angle S is congruent to angle R. So let's state that in our proof. That was given to us. Let's make sure and draw it in our diagram. And now we have 2 out of 3 parts to prove congruency. Let's come up with our plan. This is step 4. See if we can decide what that missing piece is so that we know what to talk about next. If we go angle, side angle, and talk about segment SQ and RQ, then we would have angle, side angle. But we don't know anything about those 2 segments, so let's see if we can come up with a different reason. What if we did angle, angle, and then this side, and use angle, angle, side? Well, that would work, because once again, we have a reflexive side here. So we know we're going to talk about that segment next. So segment PQ is congruent to itself because of that reflexive property. Now we know the 2 triangles are congruent, so we can name the 2 triangles. For example, the triangle on the left we could call SQP. If we do that, we got to make sure and name the right triangle using corresponding parts in the same order. So S corresponds with R, Q corresponds with itself, and P corresponds with itself. Those 2 triangles are congruent because of angle, angle, side. That's what we determined. So if the 2 triangles are congruent, all of its corresponding parts are congruent, even these 2 segments. So let's rewrite that proof statement. That's our last step. And proving corresponding parts are congruent, our reason is always CPCTC. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. All right, so keep practicing those proofs. Go through that 5-step process.